Welcome back to this untitled series where I investigate pronunciation of different words in the voice lines of the Elder Scrolls games. In this video, I want to focus on the pronunciation of people's names, or gods, or saints, or deranged wizard lords. In the Elder Scrolls, the line between those categories is rather blurry at times. Now, before anyone asks, yes, the Dwemer will get their own video, absolutely. I started working on a script and immediately fell down a rabbit hole full of missing consonants and confusing real-world counterparts. It will take a while to sort those out, but I found hidden voice lines from an actual Dwemer, which will prove useful, and there's an example of that near the end of the video. And as an added bonus, an unused Morrowind voice line from Vivec himself. Obligatory hook out of the way, let's get started looking at a handful of names I found interesting, along with a few suggestions from the comments on our last video. And I want to begin with the names where we can hear the individual in question say their own name, because that ought to settle the matter, though, as we're about to see, in some cases it really only proves that they, too, appear to be improvising. Let us begin with your own name, dear viewer. Or rather, one of the names your player character can acquire in Test 3. The Nerevarine. As you will hear in a moment, there is a fairly obvious difference between how ESO handles it and how the other games tend to handle it.
4 tribes must name you Nerevarine.
But I smell the blood of gods on your hands, Nerevarine.
Rumor has it the Nerevarine has left Morrowind on an expedition to Akavir.
Rumor has it the Nerevarine has left Morrowind on an expedition to Akavir.
It was thought to have been destroyed by the Nerevarine.
I am the Nerevarine!
Your word is law, Nerevarine.
The Ashlanders, who proudly proclaim themselves to be the Nerevarine.
So which is it? Nerevarine or Nerevarine? There are at least 2 reasonably painless ways to explain the discrepancy in our own collective headcanons. The first, naturally, is to declare that ESO is just not canon. Easy. And as someone who considers himself an Elder Scrolls fan, but has neither played ESO nor plans to, I fully approve. But if we want to respect the work done by ZeniMax Online Studios, there is another option. ESO takes place centuries before Morrowind, around 740 years. And if we compare that kind of time span to real linguistic history, the fact that names in Tamriel remain as stable as they do is actually rather generous. In our world, going back by a similar stretch lands you in the era of Middle English, which is close enough to modern English to be mostly recognizable, but the language as a whole shifted far more than the relatively small change from Nerevarine to Nerevarine. Just listen to this example from the channel LetThemTalkTV.
I call it English only. It is Outlandish folk that clappen it Middle English.
And then of course there is another layer to this that we can't ignore, which is that people of Tamriel are not actually speaking modern English at all. They are speaking Tamrielic, Dunmeri, Jael, Ta'agra, or any number of other languages, and what we hear is merely an obliging modern translation for the benefit of the player. All of that is to say that once you start worrying too much about pronunciation, you very quickly end up trapped several layers deep in lore, translation theory, and game production reality. So let us back away slowly from that particular cliff, and move instead to another name the player character can effectively inherit: Sheogorath. People often say that Sheogorath used to be pronounced differently, and in fairness to them, they are not imagining it.
Have you come to be of service to Sheogorath? And Sheogorath will reward you well.
What makes this even better is that, in the same game, Azura pronounces his name much more like the version most people are familiar with from later games.
But Sheogorath has tried to sway the decision in his favor. You have preserved the integrity of my wager with Sheogorath.
Another of Sheogorath's foolish schemes.
I'm Sheogorath, Prince of Madness! Sheogorath, Daedric Prince of Madness, at your service.
So, how are we supposed to explain that? Well, one possibility is that Sheogorath mispronouncing his own name is simply another symptom of being, Sheogorath. Another is that this version was the original one, and Azura, being Azura, was merely saying it differently out of pure disdain. which would mean that one of the most enduring pronunciation standards in the series was set because a Daedric prince decided to take a little jab at another Daedric prince. Unfortunately, that theory runs into one rather annoying problem. Since ESO, which is said earlier, already uses the more familiar pronunciation, the idea that Azura invented it later, just to spite him, holds as much water as trying to eat soup with the fork of horripilation. So, unless Azura has been traveling backwards through time for the sole purpose of preemptively bullying Sheogorath, we are probably dealing with the much less glamorous explanation that pronunciations in this series simply drift around in development. Because the devs and voice actors are just mere mortals as well. Still, speaking of Daedric princes taking jabs at each other, Jiub.
Many are dead in the land of the Dunmer. Even Saint Jiub, who drove the cliff racers from Vvardenfell, has fallen to the Daedra hordes.
I wonder what became of Saint Jiub.
I am Jiub. Some call me Saint Jiub. Others call me Jiub the Eradicator. Perhaps you've heard of me.
Yes, Jiub, we have indeed heard of you, and frankly, anyone who managed to reduce the cliff racer population of Vvardenfell deserves at least a saint's title, and probably several holidays, which, conveniently enough, is more or less what happened. Our next figure, meanwhile, is someone who could almost certainly have solved the cliff racer problem before breakfast, had he considered it worthy of his attention, but I suspect pest control was, in his view, the sort of thing one delegates to lesser beings, or perhaps to one's cloned daughter wives. Yikes. I'm speaking, of course, of Divayth Fyr. Though he appears in Morrowind, we first hear his name in ESO.
Wait, are you saying you don't know who Divayth Fyr is?
Come to consult the great Divayth Fyr. Well, I'm afraid I'm rather preoccupied at the moment.
Which brings us to the next pest Divayth Fyr did not personally deal with. Dagoth Ur.
He defeated Dagoth Ur and saved us all from the Blight.
The Bane of Kagrenac and Dagoth Ur.
Some believe his retainer, Dagoth Ur, struck the mortal blow.
Dagoth Ur welcomes you, Nerevar, my old friend.
And now we move on to the names that are spoken in proper voice lines, but never, as far as I can tell, by the people themselves, such as Master Neloth.
Neloth may be crazy, but it's better than staying in Raven Rock. Master Neloth certainly keeps me busy.
Besides, Neloth is a madman.
I need to keep Master Neloth distracted so he doesn't find out what I did.
Go tell Master Neloth.
I need to tell Master Neloth about that Ash Guardian.
So then, is it meant to be Neloth, or more like Neloth? Well, infuriatingly, he never really settles the issue by saying it himself in a neat, cooperative way one would want. He's far too busy being Neloth, which is why he only refers to himself like so.
I am likely the greatest wizard you will ever meet.
And then there's our beloved spymaster, Caius, a man whose chosen cover identity appears to be disheveled skooma enthusiast with very questionable life choices, which, in fairness, is exactly the sort of disguise nobody would suspect of being an Imperial intelligence asset, because it is too obvious. Or perhaps not obvious enough. Or perhaps everyone in Balmora simply decides not to ask. In any case, we do hear variations of his first name in later games.
The evil took hold of me the day that I slew Sir Caius on the Priory steps.
I saw Caius.
But his surname is another matter entirely. Is it Cosades? 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 As far as the spoken material goes, we are left staring at his abs. And his abs, on this occasion, decline to clarify. Next, Balladus Demnevanni. Ancient Telvanni counselor, resident of Arvstrellen, scholar, recluse. Now, his full name still refuses to cooperate by being spoken in full. But thanks to ESO, we do at least get a useful point of comparison in Revis Demnevanni, who is clearly there as an ancestral nod in the right direction.
Just another day in the life of Revis Demnevanni.
So, while that still does not give us absolute certainty, it at least gives us something more substantial than squinting at the spelling and making a noise with confidence. And then, thanks again to ESO, we have spoken versions of one of the more gloriously unhinged figures associated with Morrowind, Therana. Now, saying someone in Morrowind is eccentric is hardly a meaningful distinction. It's a bit like calling the sea damp. But Therana manages to stand out anyway. This is a woman whose taste in interior decoration, household management, and general interpersonal conduct suggests that House Demnevanni either never had an HR department or deliberately fed it to something. In ESO, where she is known as Magister Therana, we hear people refer to her like this.
Magister Therana doesn't make life easy for an honest trader.
I bring tidings from my august patron, Magister Therana.
Now, how would you pronounce this name? He's the patriarch and archcanon of the Tribunal Temple, and one of the key figures standing between temple orthodoxy and the slowly accumulating inconvenience of prophecy. But while we do not get his full name neatly pronounced for us, we do at least hear the surname elsewhere. And perhaps it's only me, but that was not the version my brain had prepared in advance.
Proctor Saryoni was a troubled man, but I won't have you defaming his name with your heresies.
Before we get to the cut voice lines I promised at the start, let us deal with the tribunal, beginning with the Alm in Alm CV. Almalexia.
Almalexia bless you.
Almalexia be praised, Sarah.
The death of Almalexia is a boon for all of Morrowind.
Then the C in Alm CV. Sotha Sil. Or sometimes a little closer to Sotha Sil.
Sotha Sil's wisdom must have fueled you, Adept.
The heart of the guild beats with the wisdom of Sotha Sil.
But Sotha Sil, he always thought himself our better.
And finally, the last missing piece in Alm CV, the V for Vivec.
You don't know Lord Vivec.
In Morrowind, they say the man-god Vivec has gone missing.
So what? What in the name of Vivec are you talking about?
Vivec was a fool.
Now, the interesting question here is not merely how everyone else says Vivec, it's how Vivec says Vivec. And thanks to one of those wonderful hidden voice lines, we don't need to resort to ESO for that. As you will hear, his voice is, let's say, rather different from the smoother, more composed portrayal many people will know from ESO.
Yes, Incarnate. I am Vivec, and I can answer all your questions.
Personally, I think it works. There is something appropriately unsettling about it. By the late Third Era, Vivec is a god who is very much in the process of no longer being quite as godlike as advertised, while also carrying the general air of someone who has spent a very long time arranging his own legend and was hoping nobody looked too closely at the seams. So this more eerie, almost infernal tone feels strangely fitting to me. Less saintly poet, more exhausted divinity with several locked cupboards in the basement.
It is lonely to be a god.
And I also promised you an actual Dwemer pronouncing a Dwemer name, which brings us to the charming, tragic, deeply unfortunate figure of Yagrum Bagarn, the last living Dwemer, the corpus-ridden engineer-scholar of Tel Fyr. Thanks to another unused Morrowind voice line, we get to hear how he says his own name.
A visitor. What brings you to visit Yagrum Bagarn, Master Crafter and last living dwarf?
Before we finish, I want to touch on a few suggestions from the comments on the last video. First, Chim-El Adabal.
One day, when I was working in the garden, I heard it. Chords of Chim-El Adabal coming from the balcony above me.
Chim-El Adabal. Chim-El Adabal, the red diamond at the center of the Amulet of Kings, is the most powerful soul gem ever created.
And then, Alessia. Now, this is a particularly fun one, because Alessia does not refer to just one person in the Elder Scrolls history. On the one hand, you have Saint Alessia, a slave queen, liberator, founder of the First Empire, and one of the most important human figures in Tamrielic history. And on the other, you have Countess Alessia Caro, whose legacy is rather less sacred founder of an empire, and rather more deeply unpleasant noblewoman you would not want to meet at dinner, especially if you're an Agonian. And I'm pronouncing them differently on purpose, because the games often do the same. Saint Alessia is usually said like this.
You need to find the stone of Saint Alessia and return it to Sirach at the chapel of Talos in Bruma.
As you guided Saint Alessia.
Though, naturally, there are exceptions.
Akatosh, the supreme god of time, gave the Amulet of Kings to Saint Alessia.
While Alessia Caro is more often said like this.
Amuse tried to sell it to Alessia Caro.
Alessia Caro visits her mother in Corol regularly.
And, wonderfully, Alessia Caro herself seems at times not entirely committed to a single version of her own name, which means that even self-identification, the last refuge of certainty, can fail us.
I'm Alessia Caro. I am Countess Alessia Caro.
And really, that may be the most Elder Scrolls outcome possible. That is all for now. If you enjoy this sort of thing, a like or comment is always appreciated. It lets me know that there are, in fact, at least a few other people out there who also find this kind of hyper-specific Elder Scrolls nonsense weirdly entertaining. And if you have any suggestions for names, titles, places, relics, saints, heretics, long-dead wizard engineers, or otherwise suspiciously unpronounceable looking words that I should cover in the future, do let me know.